Welcome back to the Country House podcast. I'm Rory Fraser, an architectural historian.
And I'm Geoff Heath-Taylor, a journalist and writer.
And today we're going to be exploring the wonderful subject of Canaletto and Canaletto Rooms in country houses. And we are thrilled to be joined by the world expert on Canaletto, Charles Beddington, who owns a gallery in Mayfair. He's just bringing out a book on Canaletto. And we're very privileged to have you here today, Charles.
Thank you very much.
I suppose for our listeners who aren't familiar with the idea of a Canaletto room, can we begin by you telling us what is a Canaletto room? I think, and then we can take it from there.
Well, most of the British collectors, patrons who bought works by Canaletto probably did so because they saw Joseph Smith's house in Venice, which was the house of Canaletto's agent, which was decorated from floor to ceiling with works by Canaletto in probably thematic rooms. So there was a Rome room and there were probably several Venice rooms. Mm-hmm. And from that, they probably got the idea of repeating something similar back in their own homes.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So that's quite clever. That's quite a clever business idea that you basically you bring people in and you happen to have the room decorated with paintings of your clients, and therefore they fall in love with it. Is that what happened?
Exactly. Yeah. Joseph Smith's drawing room was the sort of go-to place for every grand visitor to Venice. In fact, he ended up briefly serving as consul, which was something he always aspired to. And he would occasionally even effectively meet clients on the mainland and bring them straight to his house to make sure that they didn't miss it. And there can be no question that when he was there, he used the walls as a marketing exercise to show off the skills of his artist.
Right, and okay, we'll get back to him in a second when we talk more about the biography of Canaletto. But just briefly, obviously that idea was then transplanted into English country houses, and people often talk about Canaletto rooms. But it seems like quite a strange idea. I mean, you don't go into most sort of country houses and they have a kind of a Rubens room and a Velázquez room, but they do a lot of them do specifically have Canaletto rooms. So can you perhaps just quickly trot us through what they tend to look like, broadly speaking? I mean, in my experience, they tend to be dining rooms, but that might be wrong.
Well, the most famous one is at Woburn, which has 22 of their 24 Canalettos in it, right? Sort of stacked 3 high, which in fact was not the original location of the painting. So it's slightly confusing. They were taken there in the 1770s, having originally been painted for 2 dining rooms in Bedford House in Bedford Square. Mm-hmm. I mean, they weren't originally designed to fill a room on their own by any means. They were.
But am I right
intended.
in saying the dining room at Woburn was then reconfigured specifically to house them? Is that correct?
I think it was, yes.
An urban legend that the dining room was essentially built around the paintings, or changed, modified.
It may well have been, I think, yes. I mean, they certainly, 22 of them fit very well.
Okay. It's lovely for our listeners who aren't watching this on YouTube. There's a lovely backdrop here on each of our screens. So I'm afraid I'm in a very simple barn conversion in Devon with some etchings and a painting by my granny.
It's a very light barn conversion.
What looks like a print behind him. And meanwhile, Charles, sitting in his gallery on Savile Row, has a wonderful assortment of paintings behind him. And I suppose you are maybe the modern day Joseph Smith, Charles.
Yes, I hope I'm not quite as ruthless as Joseph Smith in my business activities, but
it's actually very cool. Are those both views of Venice behind you? I vaguely recognise. Is that the Santa Maria? I can't. Is that?
Yeah, they're all views of Venice.
Fantastic.
One of them is of Vittorio Emanuele arriving in Venice, going down the Grand Canal.
Good.
One of them is Santa Giovanni e Paolo, and one of them, which you can only see a bit of, is on the lagoon.
Okay, well, fantastic. Well, so we'll get to Venice in a second, which of course is where it all happens. But so, kind of in conclusion, then it seems that there is England has a strange relationship with this artist Canaletto, because there are lots of rooms in country houses that are dedicated to his work, or at least to they perhaps we'll get to this, called Canaletto rooms, but actually might not have Canalettis in them, but have views of Venice anyway. And he kind of he captures the imagination, I think, more than a lot of artists, arguably, from Italy. But moving on quickly, can you now describe to us, Charles, who, I mean, basically, let's broaden out this question of who Canaletto was. I mean, we need to try and work out why he piqued the interest of the English so much. So can you give us a kind of brief biography of Canaletto, I suppose?
Well, he was born in 1697 in Venice. Must have had, evidently had very striking natural talent, because he was the son of a painter of moderate ability who specialized above all in painting theatrical scenery. After about 1720, Canaletto emerges very quickly as an artist with far more of a sense of natural effects, air, sunlight, than any of his predecessors. And his career sort of takes off from the early 1720s. Around 1730, he seems to have formed some sort of contract with Joseph Smith, this agent of his, and during the 1730s produced a lot of views of Venice, almost entirely views of Venice during the 1730s, including 24 for the Duke of Bedford and 20 for the Duke of Marlborough, who was the Duke of Bedford's brother-in-law. So he's turning out a lot. In the 1740s, his output is rather more varied. I think he was getting a bit bored of just doing Venetian views. And he then goes off to England in 1746 and spends most of 9 years based in London, where he effectively chases up the clients who he had met before, and or who Smith had met before, and ends up providing them with a lot more paintings than they had in the first place. Often sort of completing decorative schemes by adding pictures to them. So I think the Canaletto Rooms sort of proliferate at that point. In 1755, he goes back to Venice and then has a sort of late period in a rather different style, and lived by the standards of his day to a ripe old age, and died in 1768.
Okay.
So actually, remarkably not rich. So one gets the impression that Joseph Smith, his dealer, made most of the money, and very little of it actually went to the painter he was representing.
Well, it's a classic tale, isn't it? It's a classic tale. Okay, so that's very helpful. Thank you. I suppose the key question then is to kind of flip it and talk a bit about the kind of English perception of him. Why do you think Englishmen particularly were so drawn to his work? What was it about his work that was so captivating?
Well, I think most English tourists going on the Grand Tour included Venice as part of it. And if you went to Venice, you wanted a souvenir and you wanted to show your friends that you'd been there. And Canaletto was much the most talented provider of such souvenirs. There were cheaper ways of getting souvenirs, but he was very much the best. And you could order them through Joseph Smith and make the payment in London to Smith's brother, and they were then delivered to you at some point at a later date after you got home.
That's interesting. Would the clients specify what they wanted to be painted, or would they say, "Can I have some Canalettos?" and Canaletto would choose what to paint himself?
Oh, I think they probably specified exactly what they wanted. Canaletto was an artist who was who refused to repeat himself. So if you asked him for a view, he would never merely do the same thing again. There would be interesting variations in it. But I think he must have been told which views to produce.
No, so sorry for judging, but I find that interesting because I get really, I'm not in any way a Canaletto sort of off, but my perception is that, there are so many paintings that look either are Canalettos or look very like Canalettos. I mean, there are endless paintings of sort of grand fetes on barges in front of the Doge's palace, and I've always assumed that Canaletto just painted that view loads of times. But is that because lots of copies were being made of his work, or lots of people were basically pretending to be him?
Lots of copies were made of his work. Also during his lifetime. I mean, copies were made of his work very soon after he painted them. Whether he knew that copies were being made of his work is unknown. It's possible that Smith got his work copied before he sent off the originals to England.
Excellent.
So he sort of he'd send off originals and possibly several copies at the same time.
As for you, have you ever? I mean, sorry, I'm now jumping ahead, but this is very interesting. I mean, have you ever? I imagine some of these copies are extremely good. Have you ever had to try and identify if something was a copy or not?
Yeah, most of my work recently has been on copyists.
And in your experience, I mean, how do you find out what the hallmark is, whether it's an original or not? I mean, it must be very, very hard.
Well, I don't find it hard, but I've been doing it for a long time.
Okay.
And
what hallmarks do you look for?
Well, qualitative above all, and I think Canaletto's work is pretty distinctive if you put it next to even the best copies. But certainly some of the copies are extremely good, and are occasionally by artists whose names one can identify. There's a sort of school of copyists who were employed to produce pictures which, of course, may or may not have been sold as Canalettos.
Were there some sort of slightly thick English aristocrats on their gap years who weren't really paying attention and said, "I'd like a Canaletto," and ended up buying something really crap that they brought home and proudly showed to their parents, but actually it was rubbish?
Oh yeah, I think it's quite probable. There is one case where the Duke of Bedford's other brother-in-law commissioned copies of some of the Duke of Bedford's paintings, and he presumably knew that he was getting copies because he knew that his brother-in-law owned the originals. But with a lot of these things, the original agreement is completely unknown, so one can only guess.
Interesting. But just to go back to the painting for a second, Charles, I mean, obviously when it comes to identifying, the paintings compared to copies, but also just generally in terms of why patrons were drawn to him. I mean, I find, as someone who's interested in architecture, I'm sure Geoff's the same, but it's such a magnetizing style. It's so detailed. The perspective is exquisite. There's something, the people are just kind of little dots that create wonderful kind of ephemeral crowds. What would you say are the distinguishing hallmarks of the Canaletto style, I suppose?
Well, he's obviously he's a supreme technician. He's extremely good at composition, and he's very good at depicting light. all of which set him apart from all his competitors. I think that other aspects of his style, of course, are that while you get an impression of extreme accuracy in his paintings, often if you look closely, they're anything but accurate, largely because Canaletto didn't really care very much about topographical accuracy. And in fact, he mucks around with viewpoints. Often pictures have multiple viewpoints. Buildings are omitted if he doesn't feel like fitting them in.
So the views are highly curated. Yeah.
Charles, in terms of how these paintings captured a moment in time with such detail, I find it interesting to think about how he captured moments in London that have been lost to things like the Blitz and other, sort of tragedies and histories, things like the old Horse Guards buildings and other London scenes. And I wonder, with London, firstly, it's wonderful we have these paintings as sort of a keepsake, a snapshot into what those places like the Ranelagh Rotunda were like. But what I don't understand is if his patrons commissioned him to paint Venetian and Italian scenes to speak of their grand tours, where was the benefit then in them commissioning London scenes if it was to hang in a London townhouse or a English country house? Were they painted speculatively or were they commissioned anyway?
Some of them we do know were speculations, and unlike probably all of his work in Venice, when he was in London, he did resort to exhibiting and advertising that he was exhibiting particular paintings for sale. Notably the well-known old Horse Guards picture, which is a large canvas, was painted as a speculation. And so was the one of the Chelsea Hospital and Ranelagh, which obviously didn't work because he ended up cutting it up. And it's now in two parts, one in Cuba and one in Blickling Hall, which obviously ended up being sold separately. So he obviously did find it slightly less easy to market the British views. But there are a lot of them, and they often do record buildings which were about to disappear. Interestingly, whether he felt particularly inclined or saw the value that his work would have if it recorded buildings that were about to disappear, like old Somerset House or the old Horse Guards, and others. Show scenes which very soon afterwards changed.
The photographic quality of some of his big canvases is mesmerizing for a period, obviously, that we can't see. But there's this idea that you were talking about at one point, Charles, that the paintings of London are more realistic than Venice, and I just want to push back briefly on that because, and it's a very small example, but I was very surprised when there's some famous view of his painting Windsor or something, or Eton Chapel, I can't remember. But he's kind of totally classicized it and made it look very kind of Baroque, when in reality it doesn't look remotely perpendicular. So what was going on there?
Yeah, I don't know. The painting of Eton is Eton is one of his worst paintings, and when I organised next year,
isn't it? It's sort of there. He's incorporated romantic elements that aren't real. Yeah.
I remember when I organised an exhibition of Canaletto's English work, which was at Dulwich about 20 years ago. I didn't include the picture of Eton in the loan request list, and the exhibition committee sort of took me to task and said, of course you've got to have the famous picture of Eton, and I've always thought it really was. It really is Canaletto's worst painting.
Well, it's a terrible school, so I'm very glad that you didn't include it. Eton doesn't need any more press. But that is interesting. There's so many kind of cool things to talk about with Canaletto. Funny enough, the Eton one's quite pastoral. Did he do much pastoral work, or was it really basically architectural?
No, I think I mean, I think he does like the countryside. I mean, the contrast is the view of Windsor Castle, which is accompanied by a letter which says that it was painted from a named person, sort of cabbage patch. And in the foreground is this delightful sort of scene of this back garden from which he uses as a vantage point.
But that's key. So he was, sorry, that's really important. So was he doing all these paintings on site, not in the studio?
No, I mean, I think, no, he obviously sketched on site, but I don't think he wouldn't have painted out of doors at all.
Okay. So he'd sort of go and would he be sitting there rather like in the draftsman's contract with some sort of complicated perspective machinery, kind of working out exactly what he was doing and then take those sketches back to work in oil?
He certainly did in Venice. In Venice, he certainly used a camera obscura, which you probably know all about, but is a box with a pinhole which projects an image sort of upside down onto a piece of paper. It's an ancestor of the modern camera, and was useful for getting the sort of overall general lines of a view. So if you pointed it at a stretch of the Grand Canal, you could rapidly sketch in where all the individual houses are. You could also, if you had a stable point, set it up and do quite detailed, or rather more detailed depictions of individual houses. It's always rather surprised me that he did use this on a boat on the Grand Canal, which I've always found rather surprising, because any sort of jolt would
mess it
of course
up.
Change the angle, would mess it up. But there is no question that he did do camera obscura drawings from the middle of the canal.
That's extraordinary. I mean, but of course, sorry to interrupt you, but like, was that for those incredible scenes of the kind of, the gilded Doge's barge coming in? I mean, there's really, really famous paintings of the whole kind of, I don't know what carnival it is, but I mean, I've always assumed that those images must be kind of imagined. I mean, because you couldn't capture even a tenth of it on site, even if you were doing sketches. I mean, those paintings are, and they also show, for what it's worth, the utter kind of grandeur of Venice at the height of its power before the whole thing goes belly up later on. I mean, how did he capture those incredibly complicated scenes?
I think view painters were, prided themselves on their ability to capture the nature of a scene, particularly when it wasn't in front of them. I mean, one of Canaletto's forebears used to show off his pride in painting things when he wasn't in front of them by writing the name of the city where he was when he painted them on the painting, rather strangely. So there are views by him of Venice, which have Rome written at the bottom.
That's very good.
Which is showing off that you can paint a very convincing painting of Venice while you're in Rome.
That's fascinating. I mean, a theme I'm picking up on here is this idea of, and you're talking about this with also the changing of the buildings and the kind of curating of the images. It seems that Canaletto, as opposed to popular perception of him being this highly, highly hyper-realistic painter, was creating a chocolate box image of Venice for the tourists coming in who wanted to keep it. I mean,
the impression is of great accuracy. I mean, actually, Canaletto wasn't particularly interested in accuracy. I think he thought it wasn't necessary. He knew that his clients were never going to say, you've left out the fourth palazzo on the left, or this painting has three different viewpoints. The impression is that the impression is of great accuracy. I mean, one thing which he does absolutely consistently, which is he disguises the use of scientific instruments like the camera obscura by jacking up the viewpoint in the foreground to at least 10 feet off the ground. I mean, sometimes at least on one occasion, to about 100 feet off the ground, to disguise the fact that he's using a camera obscura to capture the initial image.
And when you say that, forgive me, Charles, do you mean that he's actually, that the perspective on the paintings technically doesn't work, but he kind of fudges it to make it look good?
Yes, I mean, he's used the camera obscura to possibly from several different viewpoints to paint the buildings. But then, in order to disguise the fact that he's done that, he raises the foreground viewpoint to 10 feet off the ground.
Very clever.
To an obviously impossible level, to show that, or to disguise the fact that he's using a straightforward recording device for the initial composition.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing he was able to do, because as we said, they look so realistic, but the fact that they're so kind of confected in a way, it's incredibly impressive. But he also, he still feels to me slightly anonymous. I mean, do we have any sense of what he was actually like as a man at all?
No.
Oh, really? So he's completely anonymous.
There's almost nothing. I mean, many years ago, I was when Canaletto was promoted to have an entry in the Dictionary of National Biography, which I was asked to do. I had to fill in a form which sort of said, please give factual specifics about Canaletto's life. And the answer was almost invariably nothing known.
Really?
I mean, we know what he had in his rooms at the time he died, which, I mean, exactly how many shirts he owned. He looked after his sisters, but otherwise he seems to have been, single, and almost nothing is known about his character.
Really? What's your?
He was a single gentleman who looked after his sisters, I think, is all we know.
Oh, he sounds like a character from Jane Austen. What's your? I mean, if you had to guess, in your imagination, what would you like him to be like?
I think he was probably quite finicky and tricky.
Right. Okay.
I mean, he trained both his nephews, the children of one of his sisters, and they both sort of got out of Venice as quickly as they could.
Right.
Which may be for purely reasons that they thought that their careers would benefit from being somewhere else. There was a rumor when he was in England that he'd had a disagreement with one of his nephews, and that was why they'd gone separate ways. As far as we know, the nephews and their uncle had no further contact later in life, having parted ways in their 20s. Which is a bit sad, but
it is a bit sad. So we're not talking about a kind of Casanevian figure swanning around Venice doing wonderful paintings. That slightly breaks my heart, but never mind, it's okay. I mean, the painting is so beautiful.
I wonder if we can sort of change tack slightly in terms of tying in with the country house theme of this podcast that we do. Obviously, we'll talk in a minute, I suppose, a bit more about Canaletto Rooms and how they're curated at country houses. But as we're still talking about the paintings themselves, he did do a small number of country house portraits, did he not? So he did. I know he did one of Badminton, which is lovely because we gave a portrait of Badminton last week. I believe he did Badminton, Warwick Castle. I think he did a few of Alnwick, which is quite an extraordinary one he did of Alnwick Castle, and I think he did Northumberland House and Syon Park as well. Is that right, Charles?
Yeah, he did. Indeed, yeah. I mean, he did two paintings of Badminton, which are still there, and he did a lot of work for the Duke of Northumberland, including, in fact, the Windsor Castle, which I mentioned earlier, which is still owned by the present Duke. Since you mention it, the Alnwick Castle is actually a rather an exception because
it's not classical.
No, you never went there.
Oh, really? Yeah, it doesn't look much like Alnwick, but it just looks like a sort of higgledy-piggledy Norman castle, ruined castle on bank, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's copied from a work by. I mean, if you look in any of the books, it tells you that there's a copy of it by a British painter called Samuel Scott, who I'm sure you know. But I think, in fact, what happened was that the Canaletto is a copy of the Scott. There's no evidence that Canaletto went anywhere near Northumberland, which was quite a hike in the 18th century.
But he did go to Syon Park. Did he go to
Yes,
Syon?
he did. Yeah, and he went to Warwick, and there was a large group of paintings of Warwick, but I don't think he ever went further north than Warwick.
It's lovely that he captured Northumberland House in London. Again, talking about lost buildings that were captured by Canaletto is probably the best record we have of what Northumberland House looked like. That wonderful Jacobean or Elizabethan house with its sort of oriel and its mullions and its balustrading, that was captured in central London. The other thing I find interesting is the Badminton ones. When I was doing my research on it, it's quite fun because it's kind of the reverse views, isn't it? Because the one is towards the house, and then the other is from the house across the park, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
And again, it's an interesting one because he obviously, as Rory talked about, how he didn't often capture pastoral scenes, and that's partly because I guess he liked painting people and buildings. Is that fair?
That was certainly what he was used to, but the Badminton Park is fabulous, and it's I mean, he clearly really enjoyed doing something with which is mostly green,
a bit different, yeah.
So would it be a correct summary, Charles, to say that basically he becomes popular as a kind of basically high-end walking postcard machine for kind of young toffs in Venice, and then as a result of that gets a bit of a name as an architectural painter, so that when he comes to England, that's why he's being commissioned to paint the seats of some pretty important people. Is that basically the sort of thrust of his career?
Yes, I think that. I mean, he doesn't only paint views of England in England. He paints views of Venice for people in England as well.
That's amazing.
One of the Canaletto rooms at Farnborough Hall, for instance, in Warwickshire, he painted 2 views of Venice for the Holbeach family. And then when he was in England, he painted 2 more to sort of complete a dining room set.
That's interesting.
And that certainly, he also painted Capricci in England. He was extremely active during his years in England, sort of filling in people's walls. I think there is also an element that there's always an argument sort of loitering in the background that the purpose of these things wasn't simply as postcards. That in fact, when you hung a painting of Venice on your wall, you were making a Whig political statement.
Because it's a republic?
Yes.
That's interesting. I've never heard that. So that was actually a question I wanted to ask you next, because we haven't really spoken about the Grand Tour or Venice particularly. I mean, it's curious that the Canaletto paint, I mean, not always. I know that there's a more varied subject matter than, people think, but like people associate Canaletto with Venice, and so all those Canaletto rooms in England often have Venetian views. We're not talking about views of Rome or Ravenna or, I don't know, Pompeii, kind of Mount Vesuvius or something. It tends to be Venice. So why did England have this incredibly intense relationship with Venice, do you think?
Well, I think the Ascension Day in Venice was definitely the site that your grand tourists wanted not to miss. I mean, they tended to arrange their trips around Italy in such a way that they would be in Venice on Ascension Day, because it was the grandest festival. And that's the one when the gilt barge gets brought out, etc.
Right.
It was the most splendid event in the Venetian year, and as a result was often the subject of souvenirs.
And presumably there's also an element of glamorous ladies of the night and partying and gambling. Was that more the case in Venice than other cities?
Oh, yes, I think it was. But I think, Canaletto's Venice is one where you never see anything relating to the dark side of it, which
yes,
with which one's familiar, for instance, from the work of Casanova. You never see the sort of the secret police at work, or the way that most of the nuns were not very happy being nuns.
Yes, it's always splendid people strutting about in frock coats, sort of hopping in and out of barges laden with goods, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all very genteel, which I think Venice. I mean, the dark side of Venice was probably very obvious to the people who actually had to live in it.
Pretty louche, yeah. Pretty. Okay, but so I slightly interrupted you, sorry, because we were talking about sort of England's. So you're basically saying that England's relationship with Venice is complicated because on the one hand, it's about the high point of your gap year, wanting to remember that.
Oh, yeah, that's where I was
also. Sorry, being very kind of luxurious and having lots of good memories, but on the other hand, there's also this perhaps semi-political association with this kind of rare thing, a republic in Italy that England kind of is basing itself on. Is that fair?
Yes, I think Whig gentlemen, and I think there is some evidence that Whig gentlemen sent their sons off to Venice and told them to make themselves aware of Venetian political structure, so that they could think about it when they got home. And of course, almost all Canaletto's patrons were Whigs. And Ascension Day, which has the Bucentoro, the big barge in it, is in a way a sort of the ultimate depiction of the Venetian political structure, because you have the Doge and the Senate sort of on the top row of the barge, and then the rowers, the populace in the basement, and so the sort of pyramidal stuff form of the Venetian Republic is almost sort of depicted in the form of the boat.
Interesting. That's cool. I hadn't thought of that. So I suppose with that in mind, with the Whig gentleman in mind returning to England, could you list perhaps some of, in your mind, the best Canaletto rooms in the UK that still exist today?
Well, which still exists today. Well, the famous one, as we mentioned, is Woburn. That's much the most famous today, still existing.
I didn't necessarily mean. Sorry, I didn't necessarily mean that they all have exclusively Canalettos in them. I know that some of the rooms look like Canaletto rooms, but actually aren't. But I mean, just generally the kind of broad type example, I suppose.
Well, there were a lot more. I mean, most of these paintings, by no means all, I think, but the majority were probably originally painted for London houses, like the Woburn ones painted for Bedford House, and have only been moved out to the provinces when their owners' big houses on Piccadilly have been demolished. Other rooms which were fantastic but which are gone, for instance, are at Castle Howard, where Castle Howard had the largest collection of views of Venice, or views of Italy anywhere. The largest single collection, including a Canaletto, the so-called Canaletto room, which was dismembered starting in 1895, largely in the 1930s. And then what was still left in it was destroyed by fire during the war, when the house was being used as a girls' school and the Canaletto room burnt. So in fact, there are only 3 Venetian views left in the house. The others that weren't burnt were sold at the end of the war. So that's a sequence of rooms, in fact, with the Canaletto room in the center, which it's amusing to recreate. And there are old country life photographs of how it was before the fire.
I think they have. I mean, they Geoff and I were there recently, as our listeners will know, and they I think it's at the dining room. I can't quite remember now, but that they do. I think it's the dining room. Have a room where they've filled it with Venetian views. I mean, they're clearly not going to be Canaletto specific if they lost them, but it recreates the atmosphere, I suppose, of a Canaletto room. I suppose the question I'm very keen to explore in relation against country houses is what I think that Canaletto rooms add a certain something to country houses. I don't know whether it's a mystique or whether it's a sense of exoticism, travel. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I do think that they add a very specific atmosphere. In your experience, I mean, would you agree? Do you think that they add a certain frisson to the house?
Well, they obviously add a certain interest for me because they're the first thing I'm drawn to. But
Yes.
I think that, Canaletto, I mean, is the greatest artist of his type, whose work one often finds in English country houses. So, I mean, qualitatively, it's bound to raise the tone over his 18th century British contemporaries.
But I think it whispers of the Grand Tour, of the Whig Party, of that sort of ideal, but a lot of us who are interested in this type of history kind of lust after, which is the sort of the educated cultural guy going away and coming back with lots of wonderful marbles and things. I mean, I suppose that those paintings, perhaps more than a lot of other types of artifact, really speak of that, and I think are therefore incredibly exciting. But I mean, you, Charles, have dedicated so much of your life to Canaletto. Can I ask why particularly? I mean, what is it for you personally that draws you to him?
Well, I started working on Canaletto because I saw him as a huge problem, which in fact, in many ways, he remains, because the standard catalogue of Canaletto's work was published in 1962 and is now, it's been reprinted, but it's now fundamentally very, very out of date, which is very confusing for people looking to buy or sell Canalettos. And in fact, a lot of the things which are on the market as by Canaletto, in my opinion, aren't. And this is a problem which persists. When I first started working on Canaletto, I was responsible for cataloguing them at Christie's, and one learns by one's mistakes. And I hope that these days I don't make any. But it is a complicated area if you're not familiar with it. And I've now been working on it for 40 years. So I suppose I think I've got it more or less taped.
Mm-hmm. So you're a Canaletto ghostbuster. You go around.
Yeah.
Like that. What's it?
Yeah.
In your gallery, I mean, right now, I mean, I obviously can't really see in much detail the paintings behind you. Are you hanging Canalettos at the moment?
No, at the moment I've got an exhibition of Venice in the 19th century. So I've got a lot of the later generations of Venetian view painters. Be quite nice to have more Canalettos around, but I think I'll have I'm having an exhibition later in the year of Venice in the 18th century, which will be more relevant.
And is that the one you're taking to? Because I know you're going to be at Frieze. Is that the one that's going to be at? Is it Frieze Masters?
It is Frieze Masters. There might be bits of it at Frieze Masters, but I think generally I'm going to do something slightly different there because it's.
Okay.
It has a sort of different vibe to it.
Right. What I mean, as someone who has again spent much of their life on this subject, you must get I mean, when you bring a Canaletto into the gallery or discover a Canaletto that's been lost or something, I mean that must give you the most incredible thrill.
Oh, it does. I mean, there certainly was. There was a period when I found quite a few. I haven't found so many lately, but they do still turn up amazingly. Yeah, I mean, I would, like to see them all.
That's incredible. So it really is, there's a kind of floating area. We don't actually quite know for certain how many there are, really. So that's what it sounds like.
I think we've got a fairly good idea, but I mean, there are certainly some which I haven't seen. Not very many, I hope, but one aims to sort of see them all and pass judgment.
Well, there we are. That's an appeal to our listeners. If anyone's listening and has a Canaletto and they're not sure it's a Canaletto, then get in touch with Charles. He'll come along and he can have a look at it for you.
I would love to.
And if you think that you have a Canaletto which might not be a Canaletto, don't ask Charles to come because he might tell you it's not a Canaletto.
Charles, one last thing I wanted to pick on. You mentioned Farnborough Hall earlier. I've always been interested by the Farnborough Hall's Canalettos because normally you expect to see Canalettos in the great stately homes of England, the likes of Castle Howard or Sion or Alnwick or Badminton. Farnborough Hall is quite a modest gentleman's residence, yet it had quite a few Canalettos. I think they've been sold, haven't they? And they have copies now, I think. But maybe I'm wrong. But
they do. They have
copies
behind
why the whole beaches, why they ended up with so many Canalettos in their relatively modest Georgia sort of gentleman's residence.
I mean, the answer is we don't know because Holbeach is actually that exception. A man who commissioned views of Venice from Canaletto and also views of Rome from Panini, having never apparently been to either. I mean, they were commissioned by post initially in the early 1730s from Panini. And the group was completed by the two Canalettos done in England to add to the two previous. But we don't know why Holbeach chose to decorate his house in this way.
I suppose another question I'm keen to ask you as we're sort of quietly meandering our way to the end is, do you have a favorite, or do you have a favorite series of Canaletto paintings? Is there one that particularly speaks to you?
No, I like them all for different reasons. I suppose I particularly like the early work, sort of 1720s paintings, which are particularly atmospheric. Collectors today often don't go for them because they feel that they're not entirely what they expect from Canaletto. But I think that they're the pictures which probably most reflect his amazing sort of responses to natural effects. And after that, he does, well, I suppose one has to admit, in one to a small degree, get formulaic in the way that, I mean, you could certainly say that the way he depicts water gets formulaic. He starts doing sort of little lines to represent ripples rather than a sense of sort of the deep abyss which you get in the work of the early and mid-20s.
What he sometimes, I occasionally hear people talking about Canaletto, which is weird given how sort of hyper-realistic we think he is, being described as a very early impressionist. Do you think that's true?
I think the work of the early 20s is much more in the spirit of the Impressionists, because it is a response to light and natural effects. And Francesco Guardi, who people often say, especially French people actually often say they prefer to Canaletto, was brought up with early paintings by Canaletto, despite being a much younger artist, or in fact not having started painting views much until Canaletto was late in his career. It's early Canaletto that Guardi comes out of stylistically, rather than anything post 1730. because he obviously felt more of his interest is in sky and light and those qualities which Canaletto, to some extent, sort of put behind him around 1730.
Okay, interesting. Well, I suppose, and if am I right in thinking, I could be wrong, but you've just published a book, or publishing this year a book on Canaletto and Guardi. Is that right, or am I imagining that?
I've just the Wallace collection have just published a catalogue by Lelia Packer and me, which is about the Venetian view paintings in the Wallace collection, of which there are no fewer than 28, which are a particularly interesting group for me because they include works by a variety of imitators, some of whom I've been able to identify. So it's as a group, it's a very interesting window into what was available in Canaletto's day from a variety of different artists.
Interesting. That's very interesting. It sounds, the way you've described your career, Charles, it's great. You do sound a bit like a detective. I love this idea of sort of going around, sort of testing and looking at these paintings. It's quite sort of it's sort of Indiana Jones meets the 18th century. But I suppose if one of the lovely things is that because you own a gallery, if listeners happen to be visiting London or in London and they want to learn more, they can come and visit you, can't they?
They can indeed. They'd probably be wise to check that I'm here first in case I'm off looking for something somewhere else. But everybody is welcome.
And so it's Charles Beddington, and you have a gallery just on Savile Row.
Yes.
Perfect. Exactly. Well, again, we're very excited about the book that's going to be coming out. Again, you're going to be at Frieze in October, I think. So that's something else that people should look out for. And it's been an absolute delight to talk about the subject with you today. I mean, it's something that I've been so curious about for such a long time, and I again know very little about, but it's been wonderful to really dig into it. I don't know if you have any thoughts you want to add, Geoff.
No, it's been really interesting hearing about the context behind why, I suppose, why people we've done an episode in the past about the Grand Tour, why people wanted to have remnants of, but Canaletto was a strange one because he ended up coming here to England, painting pictures here too. I suppose what it really is it's a tribute to the fact that he was so well regarded as an excellent artist and painter that he wasn't just the provider of keepsakes or mementos to show off to your friends about something that you picked up on the Grand Tour. He was seen as one of the best painters of his era, and therefore he was brought here and did so. And I think it's lovely because it explains why, I suppose. I've always wondered why Canaletto's paintings specifically go for such vast sums compared to even Francesco Guardi's or other similar artists of that era and style. And it's because Canaletto was clearly so adaptable that he could paint those capriccios, those Venetian scenes, those country houses, those London scenes, and capture in each one an element of what was going on. I think it's. I mean, I love going into a country house and seeing Canaletto. I particularly love going into a privately owned country house that's not open to the public and stumbling across a Canaletto that I've never seen before or didn't know existed.
You might trip over Charles when you're doing it. He'll be there analysing it.
Exactly. No, it's really fun, and it is lovely. And the other thing I've always thought is lovely about Canaletto's paintings, and you see them, with very ornate frames in the Wallace collection, others, but because they are, I suppose, a landscape, but also they're quite urban. When you think about contemporary paintings and contemporary works of art that of like urban London scenes, for example, what I find interesting with Canaletto is depending on how it's framed, whether it's in an original ornate gilt frame or you could get a Canaletto sketch or pre-study or something in a simpler frame, and it can look equally as good in a contemporary setting as it does in a traditional setting. I always like paintings or artworks that can be adapted for both the country house aesthetic, the chintzy wallpaper or the damask silk wall hangings, or it can be hung in a more contemporary house in London. That's why I particularly like unfinished drawings, unfinished sketches, things like sanguine chalk sketches, a sanguine sketch by Da Vinci in a simple ebonized frame can look great in a really contemporary flat. And I'm always thinking, as someone who writes occasionally for House and Garden and other publications about interiors, I'm often thinking about how to curate and hang works. And I think Canaletto is one of those very adaptable painters for whom, depending on how it's framed and how it's hung, it can look equally as good in a contemporary or a classical setting. Is that fair, do you think, Charles?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, lots of Canalettos have been put in fairly inappropriate frames, not least in the Wallace collection, in fact, where some of the frames are terrifyingly dominant, and one longs to put them in a skip and put the painting in something that would be kinder to it. And it's been a long-standing problem in the Royal Collection. Most of those pictures arrived in very skimpy frames, and George IV added to the frames themselves by doubling the width of the frame to make them heavier. And they now, I think, seem to us very heavy. In fact, with a couple of the paintings, they've taken off the George IV's editions, but then decided that they did look too skimpy, so they didn't do it with the others. I mean, the ideal would be something in between. But I think that, reframing Canaletto is something I obviously have to think about quite often. No, I have to think about quite often, because they're often not in original or appropriate frames, and one has to sort of think about what would look best.
Interesting.
What would you? I mean, if you had to pick one particular style of frame, Charles, what do you think would best suit a Canaletto?
Well, there's a Venetian pattern which is very good on Canaletto, or there's the pattern that Joseph Smith himself used.
And what do they look like?
Well, the Venetian, they're not swept, for instance, not too heavy, enough detailing that it picks up some of the detail in the painting.
Cool.
It's been really, really lovely, Charles, learning so much from you today about an artist I've always admired immensely, and look forward to seeing whenever I visit country houses. So thank you, Rory. Great. You had your serendipitous meeting with Rory at was it a book launch that you met the other week?
It was.
We did. We were carrying on the pavement because it was far too hot inside. And we had a calming down in St. James's on a nice ambient breeze, and found our thoughts wafting to Venice. So it was very nice. It's very nice. Good. Well, it's been lovely to have you, Charles. Thank you very much for coming on. Thanks to our lovely listeners. Please remember to like and subscribe and comment on all that kind of marvelous stuff. And we'll join you again next week.
Lovely.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.